Welcome, everyone, to the second installation of the Fragmentarium video conferences series. I am Bill Duba, your moderator for tonight's event. For today's speaker and for the introduction, I will be giving the word to the Director of Fragmentarium and eCodices, Professor Christoph Flüler. Christoph.
Hello. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce my dear colleague, Professor Jacek Soszyński. Professor Soszyński is one of the leading Polish medievalists and is the current director of the Ludwig and Alexander Birkemeyer Institute of the History of Science and the Polish Academy of Science in Warsaw. I confess a great admiration for Polish medievalists, especially the historians of philosophy and history of science. Alexander Birkemeyer was one of the towering figures of the history of science, philosophy, and manuscript studies in the first half of the 20th century. He worked on such original authors like Henry Barth of Mechelen or Vitello, David of Dino, but also Albert the Great, the Aristotelian tradition, and last but not least, Copernicus. I have to say that Birkemeyer's interest and approach to medieval philosophy and history of science inspired me a lot when I was doctoral and postdoctoral student. The History of Science department of the Polish Academy of Science exists since 1958, and since 2014, it is called Ludwig and Alexander Birkemeyer Institute for the History of Science. Jacek Soszyński is, as I said, the director of the institute and leads the Old and Rare Book Studies Research Unit. Jacek worked during many years on the chronicles of Martin the Pole, also called Martin of Opava, in German Martin von Troppau, and its manuscript edition in Poland, and also made a translation and commentary of this eminent work together with Agnieszka Fabianska. His habilitation was on Sacerdotium, Imperium Studium, Universal Powers in the Late Medieval Chronicae Martiniane, that is the whole tradition influenced by Martin of Opava. In 1982, he was employed by the Central Archives of Historical Records in Warsaw, then at the Institute of the History of Science of the Polish Academy of Science since 1986 for 10 years, and then other 10 years at the Institute of Scientific Information and Book Studies of the University of Warsaw. He worked in Wolfenbüttel, Groningen, at the University of Munich, or at the University of Notre Dame. He is member of many scientific councils and editorial boards, and was the editor-in-chief of the Journal for the History of the Book and Book Collections for 10 years. As a worthy protagonist of Polish medievalists, his numerous articles focus on chronicles, history of science, and manuscript studies. It is a huge privilege that Jacek will talk about his new project, namely Manuscripta.pl, which is no less than a union catalog of Polish manuscripts and fragments still extant and lost. And I would like to give the word to you, Jacek.
Thank you very much. Before I go on to my proper subject, let me express my gratitude for being invited to this wonderful series of conferences. It's a great honor for me and the possibility to promote the project we are working on in Poland. Now, the other thing that must be said, at least in a few words before I go on to the project itself, is a few words on the medieval manuscript collections in Polish repositories, because this will reflect on the way we have to deal with the subject. In general, we have in Poland around 8 to 8,500 volumes. That's an estimate. It's still not counted properly. This is what we're striving to do. And on top of that, there are several thousand manuscript fragments. Now, as to the number of the manuscript fragments, this is all that I can say for the time being, because this is quite a number. I suppose it will exceed the number of codices, and perhaps even by far. It's far too early to say how many fragments we possess, but quite a lot. In fact, as I will talk about it later on, this has caused quite a considerable problem for us. The codices and the fragments are placed in public and ecclesiastic repositories. Around 7,000 are located housed in public repositories, whereas more than 1,000 volumes, perhaps even nearer to 1,500, are kept at ecclesiastic repositories. On the other hand, private ownership of manuscript books, medieval manuscript books in Poland is not really a factor to be considered with. We may talk about several volumes that we are now conscious of. Perhaps twice as many can be found, but it won't be more than 10 or far less than 20 volumes in the whole country. So private ownership is not a factor that is of numerical importance. The repositories that keep the manuscripts in general are spread all around the country. I suppose I should now share the screen and show you our map. This is the map with all the repositories that are in Poland that we know of. Now, there are two major centers of medieval manuscript collections in Poland. That the first and the most important one is naturally Krakow, and the other one is Wrocław. Both these centers are home to each a little over 3,000 manuscripts. So this shows you that the majority of all Polish materials are to be found in two cities, Wrocław and Krakow. This map, of course, can be enlarged further, so it can even act for people who are especially not proficient in the Polish language, and I suppose the majority of my audience this afternoon are not really proficient in the Polish language. So if you need to go and inspect in situ one of the manuscripts, you can use this map to show you how to get to an individual library. Both these centers, Krakow and Wrocław, are also places where two huge libraries, very important and very old libraries, are with the biggest collections in Poland, numbering over 2,500 manuscripts each. There we're talking about the Krakowian Jagiellonian Library, the library of the Jagiellonian University, the oldest university in Poland, stemming from the 14th century. and the other one is the library of the Wrocław University, which is far younger, but it is even more rich in medieval resources because it houses around 3,000 manuscripts. The remainder, which is less than 2,000 volumes, is dispersed, as you can see, all around the country, and 15 institutions can boast the possession of over 50 to 500 volumes, but usually far less than 500 and nearer to 50. And the rest are libraries which have from 1 to several copies each, and this is all. The Polish collections have a peculiar history, which is a rather sorry story, beginning with the break of the 19th century, even earlier, late 18th century, when we had a problem with our national existence, that is the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. It must be always remembered that it was not the Polish state, it was the Polish-Lithuanian state, which was partitioned between Prussia, Austria, and Russia. And this caused that for the 19th century, Poland was deleted from the map of Europe, and we had no national state of our own, which of course bore its consequences. First of all, there was no national library. In the 18th century, we actually had the Załuski Library, which was one of the biggest in Europe. It was it housed around 400,000 volumes, many medieval manuscripts included. But this library was taken away to St. Petersburg and Moscow in 1795 after the Kościuszko uprising as a measure of suppression. Now, in the following years, there was constructed, put together another library which tried in Warsaw, which tried to function as the national library. This was the University of Warsaw Library, or at least its first version. And after the November uprising, 1830-31, this library was also treated as war booty and taken to St. Petersburg and Moscow and dispersed among Russian collections. Jumping a little to the future, the collections which were appropriated by the Russians after the Riga Treaty in 1921 was the collections were given back to Poland, or at least a major part, and they were destroyed during World War II after the fall of the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. Now, going back to the 19th century, the lack of the National Library caused the situation that when monasteries were suppressed by the secular power of the state, the most important medieval manuscripts were taken outside the country to quite a lot of them to Berlin, to Königsberg, of course, some to Russia and some to Austria. It is one of the issues that we need to deal with here now, is what happened to these manuscripts, or at least try to identify them. Now, the First World War, as we know, created the situation when Poland was reborn, and in 1928 the library, the National Library, was re-established, and it was furnished with at least when it goes into historical materials, it was furnished with materials brought back from Russia. These were destroyed later on. And the other thing that was important from the point of view of medieval materials was the initiation of systematic works, cataloging, preservation, and all the natural things the library does with manuscripts, and quite a lot of research work was done then. This was all ended by the Second World War, which, as to books in Poland, was a complete disaster. Apart from the fact that the National Library was nearly completely annihilated, physically annihilated, other collections were also either destroyed or dispersed. Now, we have not in Poland as yet managed to get rid of the consequences of World War II. Why? Because immediately after World War II, with the advent of the communist authorities and the movement of Poland westwards, because quite a lot of territories in the east were taken away from Poland, and quite a lot of territories in the west were taken away from Germany, and with the collections, with the book collections, and were included into Poland. Now, the communist authorities felt free to do with these collections what they pleased, because they considered it just reward for the losses we suffered at German hands. And of course, from the point of view of collection history, this was not a good idea. I will give you instances of what happened later on. The other thing was that was also very important, why and explaining why this turmoil lasted, and in some fields still lasts in Polish libraries, it was that we were cut off from the West, and the finances from which were given by the ministry to libraries were very small, quite a natural thing after a war, but it also meant that there was no reference works, and in the age of no internet, reference works were absolutely crucial to describing and researching medieval manuscripts. In spite of that, quite a few very important works appeared. The most important among these was the catalogue, which was started in 1980, of the Jagiellonian Library, which is a remarkable thing, and still not finished, though. It takes very long to publish, but it's very good quality medieval work. Now, I suppose we can go to the Manuscripta project itself. First of all, I would like to say a few things about its organization in general. The goal, as Professor Flueler was kind to say, is cataloging of all medieval manuscripts extant in Polish collections, extant in collections outside Poland, that is also, of course, applying to manuscripts of Polish provenance, and a catalog of all lost manuscripts that we have traces of. This project is placed at the Institute for the History of Science of the Polish Academy of Sciences, but we also have several collaborating institutions, which is very important. First of all, the Institute of Art of the Polish Academy of Sciences, the Institute for Literary Research of the same academy, and the Wrocław University Library. The project is done by a team proper. This, I can show you the list of our members here. I will not go into names and details. If anybody is interested, the website is available, and of course you can see. Let me only say that we have in our team a musicologist, several classical philologists, Protestant theologian, several historians, as I call them, like myself, a historian of art, and a historian of philosophy. Unfortunately, we have no IT specialist. That would require a different kind of money, but we have also a number of collaborators who are very important to us, because this list is not complete. This project that we launched 3 years ago received great applause all around the country, and people are really conscious of how important it is for Polish historical studies and for the Polish culture too. So really, I have not met in my journeys around Poland from library to library, I have not met anybody who refused to help us. And this is a great thing, and I must here underline that we are very grateful to all our collaborators. Apart from individual collaborators, we also have signed collaborating agreements with or at least we are on a good way to, because we are collaborating from the very beginning with the Lithuanian Historical Institute. Now we are collaborating with Fragmentarium, and several days ago, actually on Tuesday, I've been a member of a workshop where we agreed about collaborating with the Handschriften Census and other similar projects from the German-speaking area. The initiative itself, it was started in 2014 after my visit to America, when I took part in the Medieval Institute at Kalamazoo, and while joining one of the presentations, joining in the discussion after one of the presentations devoted to medieval manuscripts on the web, I suddenly found myself disclosing to other participants that it is true that we have quite a lot of medieval manuscripts in Poland too, and the majority of that material is hardly known outside Poland, perhaps with the important exception of the German historians who are well acquainted with Polish collections. So after returning to Poland, I persuaded a group of my colleagues, the majority of them now are Manuscripta.pl team members. I managed to persuade them that we need to do something about that, because all around the world there are now internet catalogs, internet websites that are devoted solely to the study and cataloging of medieval manuscripts, and we cannot afford to stay out of this business. So in 2014 we started as a private initiative of several enthusiasts, and then after 3 years in 2017 finally we received a generous grant from the Ministry of Higher Education and Science that amounts to 2.2 million zlotys, which is a rough equivalent of €250,000 for the next 5 years. And this allowed us to launch the project at the Institute. We are supposed to complete the first stage of our project in 2022. I don't know what will happen next. Of course, we will try to persuade the authorities that this is by all means not all that can be done, and I can only hope that the authorities will accept my point of view. Now, as to the methodology of work we took up, first of all, the areas of work. As I said before, first we have to register, find out how many medieval manuscripts are there in Poland in general. So we have to perform a kind of a listing of all manuscripts in very general terms, and to put them on a single place in the internet so that everybody can reach. The other thing is manuscripts of Polish provenance in foreign collections. As I said, due to the history of Polish collections, an enormous amount has left the country. Well, this goes for every country. This is not just Polish speciality. Even the ancients said, habent sua fata libelli. Each and every book changes its owner then and again. So there's nothing to complain about, but it doesn't mean that we should not try to follow these movements of books. And this is what is the part of our project entitled Polonica. Polonica, in our understanding, are books which have a connection, which at least for a certain amount of time were physically in Polish lands during their history. So they may be sources for, they may provide source materials for studies on the history of Polish culture. This is why we need to collect the evidence and put them on the internet for the scholars. And here you will see that we have a list of countries with sometimes very far away places like the United States or even New Zealand, which is astonishing as it is, but it's true. Then manuscripts that are lost. This is a very important subject. Why? Because our experience in researching manuscripts today is that manuscripts are very often considered lost, where in fact they are displaced. And this is why we need to gather all the evidence about medieval manuscripts in the former days, usually either published or handwritten evidence, and then systematically put it together. This is I forgot to say that in our project, Mr. Schiller is responsible for the Polonica, and Professor Kalishuk, who is an expert on lost manuscripts, is responsible for this part of our doings. Why is Kalishuk such an expert on lost manuscripts? 3 or 4 years ago, he has published his very important habilitation thesis, actually for which he received the distinction by the Prime Minister of Poland for the best habilitation thesis in history of the year, because he reconstructed the lost content of the Polish National Library destroyed in 1944. He put together all the written evidence about these manuscripts and created something that we call an ideal catalog. And because medieval manuscripts have this characteristic that they are repetitive, they are not things that can be treated like printed book, that they are printed books, that they would be identical. No, but if you have a look at a catalog of manuscripts and you see something like, for instance, let's say the Chronicle of Martinus Polonus, you more or less know what is inside, because the work is known from other copies. So this is quite important. And here you can see how Kalishuk reconstructed. This is only a part of his work, because he reconstructed more than 1,500 lost manuscripts, and he will be doing this now or he's doing it for other repositories in Polish territories too. The results that we bring together during our work are immediately published on this website on the internet. Now, the first thing you will notice that quite a lot of this, let me go to Extant Manuscripts and to, for instance, Wrocław, a very important place, the University Library. You will notice that we are trying to put this in English, because we are conscious of the fact that unless this is in English, it will be practically inaccessible to scholars outside of Poland. The other thing we are doing is we are trying to produce a simple list of manuscripts, and only then later at a later stage we will go into details, but we do intend to go into details. Now, the web page I'm showing you right now is a simple HTML construction that we are preparing ourselves, but rest assured, underneath this website there is a database which is prepared by our German colleague, diplom engineer Jan Hieronymus, in MySQL, which is a rather complicated IT tool, and we are now constantly adding to this database, which is extremely user unfriendly. We have still no interface, but we still feed data into it, because the moment we start our proper website, this will provide the data, and so this is very important. The other thing that must be dealt with here is the position of Manuscripta.pl vis-a-vis digital libraries. Now, digital libraries are extremely important now for the medieval scholar, but they are not constructed by medieval scholars, and researching, finding materials in a digital library can make your hair go gray immediately, or you can even lose some of your hair. So this is why we are trying to subsidize the work our colleagues are doing in digital libraries. The makers of the digital libraries cannot grasp the simple idea that you look for a medieval manuscript by its call number. A notion simple as that is impossible to be understood by the digital libraries. So we are now providing links. This is a link from the Manuscripta.pl to a very good quality digital library of the Wrocław University, so you can inspect the manuscript on your screen. Now, the other thing is that we are providing for the digital libraries is the basic data on the individual manuscripts, which are not really to be trusted when provided by digital libraries. Not to mention the fact that each and every library does it according to its own rules. The last thing that I would like to mention in this part of my presentations are fragments. As yet, although we are dealing with fragments already for 2 years, we have not established a methodology of processing fragments at our project. We hope to do that by collaborating with Fragmentarium, because we are absolutely convinced that it is not a good idea to reinvent the wheel. So if Fragmentarium can give us some guidance in this respect, we'll be very, very happy. And for the time being, we are simply registering fragments, and this is quite a story, as I will show you in a moment. Now, what can I say about the project after 3 years of conducting it? We have now arrived at a situation where we have around 70% of Polish manuscripts registered. The happy conclusion that we arrived at is that the losses, the war losses, the World War II losses, are actually slightly smaller than it was initially estimated. You must remember that the estimates were performed by people who remembered pre-war collections and who witnessed the tragic destruction of the Warsaw collections. They projected that the same thing must have happened all over Poland. And it really seemed that a similar situation was to be found in each and every collection outside Warsaw. In fact, it wasn't. And it turned out that there's quite a lot of manuscripts that are dispersed, not destroyed, but dispersed. And a case in point in this respect is the fate of the Gdańsk manuscripts, the pre-war Danziger Stadtbibliothek, which housed a collection of around 380 medieval manuscripts. And in our possession, is a volume of the Günther pre-war catalogue of that collection, with a small piece of paper posted to the book, where there is a list of lost manuscripts, and this list contains around 40 call numbers. And ever since World War II, we are not actually personally we ourselves, but our predecessors are crossing out the call numbers of the manuscripts that have been happily found. And personally, I have also crossed out 2 or 3 of such manuscripts, which we found, for instance, in Lublin, in Krakow, in Warsaw. So these things emerge. Lately, we have found that a manuscript from the Gdańsk collection is in Moscow. I'm pretty sure that we will clear that list completely, and only few items are left on it. So this is one of the things that is showing you what happened. But from that, we are doing real discoveries, especially when it comes to manuscripts which were considered lost. For instance, in the Beinecker Library in Yale, where our colleague has found the Lond Collectarium, which was considered lost during World War II. Happily, it's to be seen, and now the Yale Beinecker Library has provided a scan of this manuscript, so you can inspect it online. There are other similar findings. For instance, I have personally discovered in Vilnius, in our collaboration with the Lithuanian colleagues, remnants of a very important manuscript from before the war, from Königsberg, but previously from the whereabouts of Gdańsk, and this is the John of Kwidzyn, original of the Vita of an important Prussian woman saint, an autograph, a partial autograph. The other thing that we stumbled upon in our project is the number of the repositories to be visited, because we go from one repository to another and register all the manuscripts that are to be found in each and every place. Now, initially, we thought that we have to deal with 120 repositories which were said to possess medieval manuscripts. But when it came to fragments, and I call this part of my presentation the fragment revolution, we discovered that the number of fragments is absolutely incredibly large. First, that we notice is that we have to take into account 75 state archives. Now, this can be proved on the example of state archives in Szczecin, which possess around 1,300 bifolios of dismembered manuscripts in the 16th century, and used as covers for diplomatic stuff, for documents, acts. So one of the members of our team, Karolina Figaszewska, is reconstructing whole manuscript books from these fragments, and these fragments are also to be found the same codices which were dismembered in the 16th century in several others, other archives in Pomerania and also in Germany too. So this was probably a good idea for a joint international project, and we are now already thinking about it, and we will start discussing the thing. We need to find a collaborator in Germany. So the other thing that we found looking for fragments is that in practically every second incunado, we find in the binding smaller or bigger pieces of medieval books which have been cut up and used as material for the bindings. This, of course, goes also into early modern book collections too, which gives us around 300 repositories more to be inspected. So from the original 120, we are now at around 500 repositories to research, and I'm beginning to doubt if we can do it within the 5-year project. Our current concerns are the construction of the researchable database, which I've been mentioning earlier. And then we are now anxious to start going into in-depth descriptions of manuscripts so that the researchers can really be satisfied with our work. But we need to finish the first stage first. Thank you very much. I'll be very glad to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Professor. And the floor is open to questions. We have already in the chat a few that have come up. So I'm going to ask for you, if you have a question, to go ahead and start writing it or the theme in the chat, and then you can either give it orally or you can have me read it. I will start off with Professor Fluler, who has asked questions about the database, which is first, he said that the information you have on the HTML site is very short, especially with content. And what do you do with a manuscript that has many parts or codicological units? And is the database searchable, or is this something that's going to come later? And do you intend to extend the information about the manuscript in the future? Those are his questions.
The database, of course, is searchable, and this is the idea of a database. Otherwise, it wouldn't provide any difference from the HTML site. What do we do with multiple part codices? Of course, for the time being, we have not the position, we are not in a position, we have not enough time to do anything more than just register the book. We have to register 8,500 volumes and many thousand more fragments. So just the simple registering is taking up quite a lot of time, not to mention the problem with the pandemic right now, which has practically stopped our journeys around the country. And I'm really worrying how will we finish in time our project, since there's no sign of the pandemic in decreasing. So if I understand that this is not really the proper way to deal with a manuscript, but we have decided that first thing is first. We need to get together a complete list of manuscripts, and then put together a list of publications, because a lot of work on these manuscripts is already done, but it's dispersed. Until it's put together, we cannot get to work on proper describing of the manuscripts. The other thing is that when we're talking about big libraries, like the Jagiellonian or the Wrocław University Library and several others, they have very competent people who are cataloging the manuscripts as part of their everyday work. So we're not really worried about the big repositories. It's the small provincial libraries which possess 1, 2, 3, or 5 manuscripts that we need to do in the first order. Otherwise, they may not be catalogued ever.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Bart Jaski. Bart, did you want to ask it? Are you going to unmute yourself and ask? See if that works. If it doesn't work, there it is.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, okay. Thank you, Jacek. You told us about lost manuscripts. You mentioned one popping up in Moscow. Do you know how they got there? Or not?
I mean, I can guess. It's most probably war booty. The German authorities dispersed the collections in the face of advancing Red Army. And these were spread around into smaller repositories, which were usually hidden. This is actually how the Jagiellonian Library got to possess a part of the Preußische Staatsbibliothek, which is still in Krakow and was not returned. Let me tell you that story because it's enlightening. When the Red Army was progressing towards Berlin, it also had among its detachments the so-called Polish Army, which consisted, which was put together in Siberia of the Poles who were displaced after 1939 and sent to concentration camps in Siberia and that kind of thing. So these people found themselves in the Polish army that was going along with the Soviet army into Poland, and overtaking one of the German strongholds in Silesia, a few of the Polish officers found these Preußische Staat collection, and they failed to report it to their Russian superiors, but they reported it to the Jagiellonian Library, and in complete concealment from the Russian allies, these materials were brought to Krakow and hidden for over 20 years. Not really hidden from the Germans, but hidden from our Russian allies. And then in the 70s, they were revealed, partly revealed, and only, I think, in the 90s, this was publicly admitted that this collection has survived the war. Now, I can assume that the Moscow manuscript from Gdańsk simply found its way into the hands of a Russian soldier and into his backpack and went back to Russia, but it could have been also taken in another situation. But it was simply war booty.
So you're not going to claim such manuscripts back?
Well, this is an extremely delicate thing. Personally, but do not consider my opinion, the opinion of the Polish government and authorities. I am personally against claiming manuscripts. Why? For purely practical reasons. This works on international basis, but it also works on internal Polish basis. Now, I remember in one of the small cities in Poland, I found a manuscript which clearly, before the war, belonged to a different collection. When I reported it to the director of that place, the lady said, "But please don't tell the owners about it." And I said, "Ma'am, I cannot. I must tell them because this is what we're here for. But I can assure you that I will tell the director of the collection in question that please don't claim this manuscript, because in that library it is considered a treasure, the one and only, while you have many more. So do put it in your inventories. I have put it in our inventory, so the people who are interested in reconstructing know all about it. They can travel to that little town, but the manuscript doesn't have to be written. It's in public possession of the Polish state, and it's perfectly safe. So let's not move it to the place. I wanted to use the word originally, but it's not really originally. It was kept there before the war for quite a long time, I must say. But then again, not really from the very beginning. And if we were to pursue this idea of reclaiming manuscripts, this would immediately cut off my work. We could stop that very moment. And this applies very much to international relations. I mean, in Germany, we have the experience that we can talk with people. But if we're going to Moscow, this can immediately shut down any project. We need to know where the manuscripts are. We want to describe them. We can photograph them. We can scan them. But let us not talk on reclaiming. This is political stuff. We are scholars.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 1 quick minute left in our assigned hour. There's a question from Anna Adamska from Utrecht.
Yes.
Please.
Hello, Jacek. Lovely to see you, and lovely to hear. And lovely to hear about the development of the project, which works in the way because many Polish scholars spread around the world use it already, you know. But I have a question about another scholarly initiative, which it seems to me is somehow connected to the Manuscripta.pl. This is the repertorium which just appeared, prepared by Jerzy Kaliszuk and 2 other colleagues. Clavix Textorum. Maybe you could say a word about it, because it's worth to be accessible. Yes, it's worth to be accessible in English as well, and not only okay. Please tell to the people what it is actually.
I think all that need be said is it's a Polish podcast.
Okay, is there any chance to put it in the PDF form on the website of your project?
No, there is none.
It's a pity.
Why? Because this we're going into copyright.
I see.
But it's already on. As far as I know, it's already available on the internet, and we can place a link.
Yes, putting simply the link to this website, to this platform where, yes, it would be lovely, because it's something already as far as the contents of composite manuscripts are concerned.
The other thing that I can say is that we are now desperately trying to find the money to put this on the internet, but not as a PDF, but as a database.
Mhm.
I am trying to convince my colleagues and authorities that it's worth doing, because such a clavis scriptorum et operum medievi Polonie is an ongoing work. It's
Of course.
this published material is important, and it's for today, but research goes on. New things are found. For instance, I myself have found during my research something that is of interest to German scholars, the Königsberg Universal Chronicle, another copy, because the most important copy was lost in 1944, and only one was considered extant, but we have now two. So I will be trying to publish that soon. So this clavis should be another project on the internet, a sister project to our work, and Kaliszuk and his collaborators are, I suppose, willing to consent.
Okay.
All right, thank you. And I just wanted to say as well that Lynn Ransom has put a note in the chat on the Mapping Manuscript Migrations project, which gives returns on Poland that are very interesting. So we will put that in the recorded version as well. I wanted to thank you again, Professor Soszyński, for your enlightening, informative presentation. And thank you all for attending, and say that, you know, it was a wonderful talk, a wonderful discussion. And our next Fragmentarium video conference will be the 18th of December, where Professor Tuomas Heikkilä, Professor of Church History at the University of Helsinki, will be speaking about fragments in Finland, manuscript culture at the edge of the Latinitas. Thank you again, and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.